I officially, let's say, became vegan and decided I would never touch an animal product again after my first child was born in 2016. Because of my breastfeeding journey with her, I worked really hard to establish a breastfeeding relationship. It's not so easy, as many mothers know. And when that happened, I started to make that connection between what cows go through in the dairy industry. In Aruba, for better or worse, there just weren't vegan restaurants. And so the only place to get vegan food was at these mainstream restaurants. What do you do when you're in a challenging situation? So I feel that you can either try to change yourself, which we all should start with, right? What about me can I work on? Or you can change where you are. So maybe you're just not in a good fit, right? You're not in a good fit environment, so you actually have to just leave or go live somewhere else. Or you actually try to change the environment you're in, so you make an impact on the community, you make an impact on the environment. You're like, wait a second, 5 million animals were killed in the time that I had my work day today. And remembering what that is, what the reality is and why we're doing this. And it's really heavy. So there's a lot of self-care that also has to go into it, and community that has to go into making veganism your life purpose or your career. Having compassion for myself and other people is really essential. It's essential. You really can't make an impact if you are thinking the worst of everybody and thinking the worst of yourself. If you want to do better, you have to believe it's possible.
Welcome back, legends, and also a big shout out for your new year. I'm Callum, Weir, your vegan nutritionist and host, and this is the Plant Fuel Podcast, and I'm so stoked to have you here with us today. All right, today's guest is one of those people you just can't help but feel inspired by, Meredith Marin. Meredith is an absolute force, and her journey has brought about some real change in the world of vegan advocacy. This episode takes us deep into her story, from her life-changing move to Aruba and what led her to founding Vegan Hospitality, to her mission of helping restaurants offer more vegan options. We talk about making sure your needs as a vegan are met when you're out and about at restaurants, socially and nutritionally, and how to approach your lifestyle with more mindfulness. Meredith shares her eye-opening backstory, including an experience that made her rethink everything she's putting on her plate. We dive into how to create mindful practices that go beyond what we eat, the power of community-driven change, and the spark that has led to vegan hospitality being born. Her work is all about empowering individuals to push for compassionate, sustainable dining options in their communities. Meredith's knowledge is abundant. Her passion is infectious, and I guarantee you'll walk away from this conversation feeling inspired and ready to make your own impact. So, let's get into it. And hey, if you're loving these episodes, I'd be so grateful if you could hit that like, drop a comment, or give a star rating, whatever platform you choose allows you to do. It's your support that brings me these incredible guests, and also the topics you have been asking for. Thank you so much for being here. Alright, let's dive in. Peace and plants. Meredith, welcome to the Plant Fuel Podcast.
Thank you.
So it's weird, but over the last few months, the more I speak with people in the community, the more your name comes up more and more, like in passing conversation, and obviously sometimes at like networking events, and then obviously moved to Bali, and then my next door neighbor is also a mutual friend. So it's such a small world that you seem to be everywhere.
It's very funny when you tell me the people that you know, and I think the person who referred you to me for this podcast, it's so funny to hear how widespread this network is, because I mean, you're all on the opposite side of the world from me, yet you're living with someone who I feel very close to, who I've actually never met in person, yet we've known each other for many years. So this vegan world is so tight. But I think also for me, it's a testament to really, I have focused on building my network over the past several years. I started out when I first went vegan, I didn't know any other vegans. When I started becoming an activist, I didn't know any other activists. And building a network has been so crucial to me to actually keep going and do everything I'm doing.
We're such a niche community as well, of like everyone doing their own thing, that like everybody kind of intertwines at some point. And it's just beautiful to see that we have these connections all around the world. And then by one chance or another, people just seem to know each other somehow. But I feel like you're definitely obviously making an impact, because obviously at one point, left, right and center, your name was coming up. But for those that don't know who you are, who is Meredith Marin?
That's an interesting question, because I feel that I wear many hats. Ultimately, I'm just a human trying to leave the world better than I found it, which is surprisingly hard to do in this current climate. But I'm a mom, and I have 2 kids, and I'm a vegan activist. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a mentor for other entrepreneurs in the vegan space. And I also am a consultant for restaurants and hotels that want to become vegan friendly.
Yeah, I was about to say you do hold a lot of hats right there. Is there's a lot going on. So if we take it back to the beginning, like prior to Aruba, which we'll talk about in a bit, where did the journey start for you? Because I feel like everyone has their quote unquote like origin story that kind of propelled them into what they do now and how their journeys unfolded.
Yeah, I think so much goes into making a person and a career path, and you could trace it back to a lot of different aspects, starting with childhood, of course. My childhood started with myself being born into a family of butchers. So my grandfather was a butcher, and it was a very big part of my childhood because he had his own store. And so we would go to the family store, and I remember exactly what it was like being in the freezer with the cows. And I wasn't vegan then, but I always had a distaste for animals, for eating them. So growing up also in New York City, not really being around live animals, it was very much, the live animals I was around were cockroaches and rats. So it wasn't very much a farm experience. And, growing up, I had to find that connection myself with animals and also make that link myself. For me, when I first started to make that connection, it actually was because of something that happened to a human. So it's a little bit, I think, of a different story than people usually tell around how they made that connection to animal lives. It was my first year in college. I was 18. I lived in New York City, and my friend Eric knocked on my dorm room door and told me this story about how he was in the subway station and he saw a man walking on the subway tracks, and he tried to rescue this man from the tracks, and he grabbed him by the arms, but the train came and threw the man across the platform. Eric followed him to the hospital, and the man ultimately passed away. But Eric, being this really good person that he was, this college student, decided to find out more about the man and how he could help the family. So this man was a immigrant from Bangladesh who was deaf and working on the trains, and he had dropped his hearing aid, and that's why he was looking for it on the tracks. And he was sending all of his money home to his family in Bangladesh. So Eric was knocking on my door because he was collecting money to send to this family. And this story touched me so much. I felt called to do something about it. So I gave him whatever change I had. I was 18, didn't have a job. So I also emailed everyone I knew, my family, friends, and I collected maybe $30. I felt like whatever I was doing wasn't enough. And during this time, I made this connection that I just wanted to do something to honor life and appreciate life. During the time I was also studying philosophy. I was a philosophy major, so thinking about ethics and just coming into my own as a young adult. And in my mind, I made this connection that I was contributing to harm and murder 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that the best thing I could do at that point was to become vegetarian. So I did. So the next day I became vegetarian, and that started my vegan journey. Didn't really know what vegan was at the time, but over time, I had this winding road to get there. I officially, let's say, became vegan and decided I would never touch an animal product again after my first child was born in 2016. Because of my breastfeeding journey with her, I worked really hard to establish a breastfeeding relationship. It's not so easy, as many mothers know. And when that happened, I started to make that connection between what cows go through in the dairy industry and understanding how painful it can be, how upsetting it would, of course, be devastating if someone took my baby away so that they could drink her milk. And I just decided there was no way I was going to be able to continue to harm animals in that way. So that was almost 9 years ago now. And it was this very quick shift from, I'm making this commitment, I'm going fully vegan. And also now I have to be an activist. Well, a lot of vegans feel that way because they want to share it with the world and announce it and tell everyone else the good news. We know how to make a more peaceful world. We know how to help animals. We just stop eating them. So I was just like that. Yet I was living in a community where I didn't know any other vegans because right after our daughter was born, we moved from New York City to the Caribbean island of Aruba. So I didn't have a network. I didn't have friends. And the vegan lifestyle was also very, I don't know, I would say probably there were people who were eating more plant-based, but there wasn't a lot of awareness or talk about it in the community. So I had to find a community and make a community. And for me, I started focusing on Instagram as a way to build community. I started an account called Vegan Aruba, and that's really where my activism and eventually business journey started, with building a community and then building a business upon it to make a difference in the community and now globally.
That's incredible. Like, as you mentioned, obviously there was probably some like plant-based eating over there, but I'm assuming like vegan wasn't really on the menu for a lot of these places as well. Like I know for like traveling a lot myself in like, you know, small remote islands and other like Caribbean islands, there isn't a lot of like vegan options for you, or there'd be like the one novelty place that does have like an option, but it's very much like maybe a side salad with like fries, and that is kind of like your 80s option still.
Exactly. I was just eating pasta marinara everywhere, and nobody really understood what vegan meant. There is an agricultural issue here because it's a desert-like climate, so most of the food is imported. So you don't have a lot of, now it's gotten a lot better over the years, but there wasn't that ability to go to a local farm and pick your own produce. And, it's difficult. It's also very expensive when the food is imported. So I would get a lot of people telling me, well, it's impossible to be vegan here. You can't do that because you won't be able to afford it. And the food spoils quickly because it's already been traveling for so long before it even gets here. So the quality isn't so great. So there were a lot of challenges, and I had to navigate all of that.
Yeah, how do you start to navigate that? Because you must have to have some sort of courage to kind of go to like move to a country that like is not known for vegan places, you being like one of the only vegans there, and then kind of starting off with a movement to kind of try and veganize a country as well. And like a lot of people that would move there would probably kind of deal with the fact that restaurants just don't have these options, and just kind of let's eat at home and, you know, deal with what we've been given. And just there's not many people that will kind of try start a movement as such.
Yeah. And I don't even know if that was even my intention, starting a movement, because when I first started trying to build community, I was really just trying to connect with other people who were like-minded or who had some interest in what I was trying to do, which was to simply live a vegan lifestyle in a place where that was very hard to do it. But I have had this thought in my head for many years around, what do you do when you're in a challenging situation? So I feel that you can either try to change yourself, which we all should start with, right? What about me can I work on? Or you can change where you are. So maybe you're just not in a good fit, right? You're not in a good fit environment. So you actually have to just leave or go live somewhere else. Or you actually try to change the environment you're in. So you make an impact on the community, or you make an impact on the environment. And I had to do that. So I had just moved here. I wasn't going to leave right away. And I had already changed myself. I went vegan, and that felt really like a good fit for me. And so all I could really do was start reaching out to my community. And I started by being clear about my own needs. So setting boundaries, essentially, not necessarily saying you need to do this or that, but saying, if I'm going out to eat, I need to be really clear about what that means. What am I willing to eat? Or if I'm going to eat dinner at my mother-in-law's house, it's not very nice of me to go there and get the fish on my plate and push it around and pretend to eat it, which is what my husband and I did for like the first couple of weeks before we really understood how to navigate those situations. And we had to be really clear and say, this is our value, and this is how we're going to live. And I'm lucky to be mentally well enough to do that, to be honest, because I think that it's not so easy for everyone to have these difficult relationships and social situations and have to always be standing your ground and feeling maybe defensive when people are not understanding of your lifestyle. It's really hard. And I feel like my mindfulness journey. So I have also a background as a social worker, mindfulness practitioner, and that really supported me in being able to stick with my lifestyle, and also stay calm amidst the difficulties that I faced. And that's something that I also support other vegans with through my programs when I teach people how to be consultants or help them with being a vegan leader. I support them with that mindfulness tool, because it really helps you kind of step outside yourself for a second and remember, wait, this isn't about me. There's a lot going on for this other person too, and we have to find some common ground.
Yeah, because I think like from both ends of the spectrum, like for people, if they are vegan, if they, let's say they're new to veganism as well, there's a lot of emotion there as well. There's a lot of sometimes pent up anger that they haven't released yet. Obviously, for a lot of us, that gets easier over time. Like I remember at first I was the angry vegan, and then it's kind of over time you just learn to kind of deal with life, and this is how it is. And also from the other end of the spectrum, these people that own restaurants, and they don't exactly know what it is. And like, if you go in there like yelling and screaming, not much is going to change. Like, it's kind of meeting those people where they are, to kind of make sure that this situation works well for both of you.
Yeah, I started off by trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and assuming they actually did want to serve me and they just didn't have the tools to do that. So I would try to think, well, how can I support them with serving me? So I would call restaurants in advance and let them know I was coming. And I would ask to speak with the chef and kind of coach them through, what can you make for me? And if what they wanted to make didn't feel satisfactory, then I would explain, well, maybe you could buy some tofu and include that. And they would say, well, I don't like tofu, or it doesn't taste good, or how do I make it taste good? And I would explain, here's the tofu you need to buy. Here's where you can buy it. Here's how you can cook it. What flavors can you use? And eventually I would start to get some really delicious dishes. And I would ask the chef, how can I support you with this? I would take pictures, post it online, encourage other people to go taste the food at this restaurant. So it was this win-win for everyone. The chef was making food they were happy about, and I was sending people to go eat the food. I think a lot of the reason, there's so many reasons why chefs might be hesitant to cook vegan food, but one of the main reasons is because they don't like the way it turns out, because they don't know how to make a great vegan meal. So they don't want to put a plate of food that feels subpar to them and that represents their skill set to a customer and potentially have that customer have a bad experience. So they'd rather not try at all sometimes.
Yeah, in the past I've worked with chefs, and for me being vegan, like, I know after a while how easy it is to kind of marinate tofu, for instance, or tempeh, or create a delicious meal. However, people, although they have been trained, a lot of it is very meat orientated. So like, when they get given something like tofu, and tofu, it can be intimidating at first as well. Like I think when any of us have first picked up a block, we're not really too sure how to cook with it. It's experimenting. And like, I think with especially the chefs that have a long history of like meat and like not much else, like, it's going to be a whole new like turning point for them. They're not going to know what to do, and it's going to have to be a whole new kind of like revolutionary cooking style for them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why they need support. I mean, that's why I started consulting, and restaurants were happy to get my help because the chef has their own job. They're very busy making the day-to-day food that they have to create from the menu and managing their kitchen and managing their staff. They don't necessarily have time to go to the supermarket and figure out of the 10 different types of tofu, which one is the best one to use for this dish. And then how do I cook it and season it and make it allergen friendly? And there are a lot of things to think about when you're creating dishes for vegan guests. So that's also why I support other vegans in consulting in their communities, because this is needed worldwide. Chefs have this need for support, and maybe one day they won't. Maybe one day we'll be able to get education into the culinary institutes where there are going to be vegan chefs there teaching chefs how to cook delicious vegan meals, but we're really not there yet. And so there's this gap in the industry where vegans really need to step up and go in and say, we're going to teach you how to make quality food for us. And that's what we're doing.
It's incredible that you've also got the opportunity to go and do that and also teach people how to do that as well. Because I feel like if it wasn't for situations like this that you've been put through, then none of this would have kind of escalated into what it is now. And then there could be still places throughout the world that, don't have these options because it's something that people wouldn't know how to kind of go about. And it's only due to like watching you from afar or like training with you that there's these options available in certain countries, in certain states, in certain restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, but we've come a long way. So I've been doing this since 2017, and it only took about 2 years before Aruba started to get recognized as a vegan-friendly island. So remember when I came here, there was really nothing for me to eat other than pasta marinara. And now if you go on any vegan travel Facebook group and you type in Aruba in the search bar, you're going to see people saying Aruba's the most vegan friendly place, or Aruba's the vegan oasis. And it's just so funny every time I look at that and I think about, how did this happen? It happened so quickly. It's quite amazing. And of course, I'm even more critical because I live here. So I think, we still have a long way to go. But for vegan travelers to be able to come and get a vegan meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for every day of their week-long trip, that's a dream that you can't really experience in a lot of places. So it's definitely a testament to some hard work and the community getting on board. And then I've now trained over 100 vegans in 25 different countries, and they are starting up businesses and projects and initiatives. So this is really widespread, and I'm learning with them, learning how to navigate doing this in other countries, because it's not always the same, and it's not always as easy as it was for me in Aruba. Every country is different. And of course, some of these countries are much larger. I live in a very small island where it was a lot easier to make an impact. So we're looking at China and Malaysia and India. I mean, huge places, and and the US. So I'm training someone in Australia right now. So we have the whole world that really needs this kind of support, but it's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot of people on board to get it done.
Did you ever think this was going to happen, from you just kind of moving to an island, asking for a few restaurants to create a recipe for you, and how this is literally transformed into a whole entire movement, basically? Like, this is like for someone just moving somewhere and just asking a few chefs to change some recipes, it's changed a whole kind of projection of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's changed my life. I feel that it's changing the industry a bit, and I couldn't have never predicted it. And you can kind of see every step of the way how I've been very reactive. So I never really set out to do certain things. It's been very reactive in my activism journey, my business journey. Like, okay, here's the need. Now I need to work toward meeting that need. And I still operate like that in a sense, because the need evolves and the need for how I need to operate evolves with that. But you can see that I'm very much an action taker. So I don't sit around thinking, how do I do this? How do I do this perfectly? I just work to take the next step. And you can see that through like Vegan Aruba. I mean, I didn't sit around thinking, what's the perfect brand name for my Instagram? I'm just like, okay, I'm vegan and I live in Aruba. And then I started my business in 2019 to go global. It's called Vegan Hospitality. I didn't think about what's the best brand name. I was like, okay, vegan, hospitality, put it together, website up, good, we're done. Let's go do the work. So I operate like that with, what's the best way to move forward? What's the quickest way to move forward? And that's, it's figuring it out as I go. And also, I think being humble enough to realize that there is a lot I don't know, and I have to learn along the way and learn from the people I'm teaching sometimes as well.
Did you ever fear that like you were going into like another culture and then kind of asking them to change for you? And at this point, it was probably only you and maybe a few others. And like before this all kicked off, you were very much kind of an outsider coming in and could have been seen as like, these are just crazy demands.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very conscious of that in the beginning. I think I was probably more self-conscious about it than anyone who would ever even have that thought about me, because of my social work background, because I was very much taught about being culturally appropriate, taught to empower and uplift communities versus coming in and colonizing or telling them what to do. So that was on my mind constantly. It's still on my mind. I still think about how do we do this in a way that is going to be community oriented. And a lot of my decisions on how I've built my business were with that in mind, with how can I empower local communities versus come in and try to change them. So I do use mindfulness, like I shared, being really conscious of my own thoughts and the way that I interact with other people. But I also utilize other skills like motivational interviewing, which is a way to support other people in finding their own motivation to make changes in their lives or behaviors or business. So especially when I'm working with business owners who own restaurants, I'm not going in and telling them, you have to change your menu for me. I'm working with them to try to figure out, do you have any internal motivation to do this? How is this going to benefit you? Maybe it's going to give you more customers, or maybe you want to have a more sustainability focus for your business, and this will support that goal. We try to figure out, is there some sort of shared agenda, and how is this going to support them? And I think that allows us to move forward in a way that feels safe and respectful for everybody. So it's definitely something that is important to keep in mind. So I'm originally American, and where I live in Aruba, it is a very tourism-centric community. The economy runs on tourism, and that is really tricky because the community depends on it for financial reasons, but it also means that Americans and other outsiders have a lot of influence, and that does affect the local culture, and it does affect the way that the country evolves. So I think that we need to also go back to the roots of, what does it mean to be vegan? Am I just demanding that you cook for me a certain way, or are we actually having this kind of shared value of respect for the land, respect for nature, respect for the animals? If you go to the National Archaeological Museum in Aruba, you can see the history of animal agriculture here. It wasn't locals, it was colonizers that came in and started saying, we need to slaughter all these animals, and this is what you should be eating. Locals were farming the land and maybe, eating the one goat they had in their backyard all year. They weren't buying factory farmed meat from America and importing it and serving it to tourists. So we have to think, where do we have that shared agenda, and how can we go back to the ethics that we really share, where we want to have a sustainable land. And sustainability is such an important topic in Aruba now, but everywhere really, because we need to sustain the planet in order to live on it. And especially for these islands that have been colonized, they want to go back to that sustainability of that native wisdom that they know. And I do think that the vegan lifestyle is really supportive of that, especially if we can use it to uplift the local farming community and focus less on importing food from factory farms and more on how can we get back to the way things were before.
Yeah, that's the thing. It is very much kind of meeting these people where they are. Like there's only so much they can do at that time, and like they obviously need that help as well at this time. Like whether that be from like you or someone else to kind of at least develop a relationship to understand exactly why they need to be doing these things, how they need to be doing these things. Because without people like you or other people coming in, like that, it can kind of get stuck in time.
Yeah, and it's not that I feel a consultant should go in and tell them how to run their business. In actuality, if they're going to hire a consultant, it's because they have a problem that they want to solve, and it's a privilege for them to have that consultant show up at their door and be ready to solve that problem. So the chefs I've worked with, it's mostly because they are already trying to serve vegan guests and they're not doing it successfully for whatever reason. They're getting bad reviews, or they're having to turn customers away. They don't have products in stock that they need. They don't know how to make it profitable for their business. And with support from a consultant, they can have a better experience. The customer can have a better experience, and the restaurant can have a better experience. So it's a win-win for everybody.
What was the first chef that kind of took a chance on you to kind of like come in and help out? I mean, there must have been this one. There must have been this one person at one point. I was like, yeah, this is the lady I need, and then this is just kind of escalated from this.
There were a couple. So I gave a presentation at a restaurant association, and I was just giving a presentation as a customer. I did not have a consulting business at the time, and the presentation was focusing on the experience of a vegan customer and really explaining the difference between vegan, vegetarian, and gluten-free, because those terms were highly confusing for the industry at the time, and I think still are in many places.
I was about to say that gluten-free and vegan sometimes means the same thing in some people's eyes.
Yeah, it's terms that just, if you're not living that way, then it's just another difficult customer, essentially. So the presentation I gave was just a collection of my experiences and photos I had taken eating out at all these restaurants. And when I went to present, I didn't really know who was going to be there. Turned out a lot of the pictures I had taken were from restaurants of owners and chefs that were in the room. And I was pointing out, your menu is mislabeled, and this is the dish you served me, and here's what I cooked for myself last night. Do you see the difference between the dish you served me and the food I eat at home? And so what the vegan customer is expecting is to have a nutritionally satisfying dish and to have flavors on the tofu, not plain tofu. And, to not have to eat pasta everywhere they go, and to not have to send their food back because they have butter on it. So just really explaining what it is like as a customer. And I shared that I'm not the only one. So it can't be just me that wants to eat this way. There are other people, and especially because of being in a tourism focused community, understanding that you are turning customers away when you're not having on menu items to serve them. So the first person who approached me after that meeting was a restaurant owner who had a Cuban restaurant. And he told me that he was vegetarian himself and he couldn't even eat at his own restaurant, which I thought was funny. You're the owner. Why not change something? But he didn't know how. So he didn't know how to, I think he didn't know how to make it profitable in a sense, because vegetarian, vegan options are historically just not the most profitable items when you're not understanding how to create flavorful dishes and upsell them to guests. So he asked me to come in. He said, next week, we're updating our menu. We're going to reprint it. Can you come and take a look at it? And I said, why me? I'm a social worker. I was a university professor at the time, stay-at-home mom. I had other things to do. And I said, why? You work at the restaurant. Why can't you do it? And he said, well, our cooks don't know how to cook with tofu. They don't understand what vegan is. And if you don't come and tell us what to do, we probably won't be able to do it. So I said yes. And I went over to his restaurant, looked at the menu, gave some tips. Here's what I would do. I would veganize this dish. I would use tofu for this. I would, do it this way. And he said, okay, can you go to the supermarket and buy all that food and bring it back? Come over to my house. I'll invite the chefs over tomorrow and you can show them how to cook it. And I said, really? You want me to do all that? Oh, okay, sure. So I started Googling Cuban vegan recipes because I didn't really know much about Cuban cuisine either. And learning a bit about, what are the flavors in the cuisine and how I can match what's going on with their menu already and make it easy for them. And I went to the supermarket and I bought all the things and showed up at his house the next day. And all the cooks spoke Spanish and I did not. So I was trying to explain to them, this is tofu, this is tempeh. Those were the only specialty products available at the time in the supermarket. There was no vegan cheeses. There was no vegan sour cream. There was nothing other than tofu. And tempeh was actually really hard to find as well. But we had a little Asian supermarket and I was able to go and get those ingredients. And we made a Cuban sandwich. We made a ropa vieja, which is, it's like a very traditional Cuban dish made out of pork, but we used tofu for that, and a couple other dishes. And the chefs liked it. They were inspired. They were like, oh yeah, I think I can work with this. We know what to do. And then they put it on their menu. And actually we launched a separate vegan menu to start. So we had the vegan dishes on their own page. And I think there were about 5 dishes that it started with. And they did a little promo and they had a line out the door for this menu. People were really excited about it. They were so excited that other restaurants started calling me and saying, I saw what you did for this place. We need your help too. And then I realized, hold on, we've put this food on the menu, but we didn't train the servers. They don't know how to talk about this food. They've never tasted this food. So I went back to the Cuban restaurant. I did a training for the waiters and started to explain to them, what are these vegan customers wanting? Why do they want to eat this way? And that's where my program started to get developed. And then over time, that first year of consulting, I worked with a lot of restaurants very quickly. It's going from one to the next and developing my program based on the needs. So seeing in the kitchen, what do the chefs need to understand about the vegan guest? And then going into the front of house and talking to the servers, people who answer the phone, the management, what do they need to understand? And then eventually going to hotels and starting to work with them and seeing, how do you work with multiple restaurants? And what about the concierge and the front desk? Really ultimately everyone needs to understand the vegan guest experience, because the vegan guest is interacting with housekeeping and they're interacting with the cleaning staff and the toiletries. So everything, vegan lifestyle is not just about the food. And ultimately you need to be trained completely. The whole business needs to be trained in order to confidently serve that vegan guest. So it was someone taking a chance on me. It was me taking a chance on myself and saying yes to go and do something I wasn't exactly sure I would be capable of. And over time, I learned to do better. I didn't have a culinary training, so I had to go online and take knife skills courses to make sure I was using knives properly and understanding, working through recipes. One of my early clients was a seafood restaurant, and I had to learn how to make seafood out of watermelon and carrots. And because like I said, we didn't have any of those plant-based seafood alt meat products at the time. So everything was whole food, plant-based, and learning how to do that and learning how to season things. And for me, it was a very creative and fun process. I know not everybody loves to cook and likes to do that. So I was lucky that I stepped up to the challenge and it turned out to be something that I really enjoyed doing. But there's really a high need for this throughout the hospitality industry. And there's so many businesses that could benefit from working with vegan consultants in this way.
Yeah, I think like with working along chefs like in the past, some have obviously no idea what's going on, but many do kind of understand the concept of it, of like no meat, no eggs, no fish, and then they forget about the condiments. The condiments are like the sauces or the butter. That's kind of like, oh, we've cooked everything, it's vegan, and then there's something, and they've made their best effort as well to do this, and like. You can't fault them for trying to make the effort as well. It is like they've gone out of their way. However, there's some things that people just naturally forget that just aren't vegan, like your mayonnaise, for instance.
Yeah, well, they often forget the dessert. You see this all the time. You have a great vegan meal, and then you're sitting there eating fruit while your family and friends are enjoying their chocolate cake and creme brulee and cheesecake. And I think probably where you are in Bali, that's not a problem. I've seen lots of pictures posted from Bali. They've got great desserts there. But I think in most of the world, you don't really find great vegan desserts at mainstream restaurants. So that is something that also needs to happen, is the restaurants need to understand the vegan guest experience. It has to go from breadbasket to dessert and also to drinks. We have to look at the vegan friendliness of wines as well.
Yeah, that's another big one that like I think a lot of vegans don't realize either, is that like wines are a huge issue, which is I still don't understand at this point why we still do that whole process of like fish bladders or fish guts or whatever it's filtered through. I feel like after a while, like that something should have changed, but it's still very much a huge thing in the wine industry and the beer industry in particular.
Yeah, we just hosted a conference. So if you go on YouTube and look up the Global Vegan Hospitality Conference, you'll see our third conference that we just had. And we had a vegan wine specialist, Frances Gonzalez from Vegan Wines. She does a whole story about vegan wines, understanding what makes them not vegan and how to source vegan wines. And something that she talks about that I didn't really understand is actually it's not just the fining process. So what you talked about with the isinglass, the fish bladders, but also the soil. When you're using manure and fertilizers that are from animals and you're growing the grapes in that kind of soil, it's also not vegan. So it is really, it gets more complicated the more you know as a vegan, of course. So the people who are listening to this and they've just gone vegan, they're like, what's going to happen? Like, I'm making so many mistakes. And that's a very normal thing to think. Like I said, I started as a vegetarian 20 years ago and I learned over time, one thing after the next. And a lot of what I learned also was from working with restaurants, because I would never think that, oh, they've put chicken broth in the vegetable soup or beef stock in the marinara sauce. What did I hear the other day? Someone said they went to a restaurant that put chicken broth in their salsa or their chips. So you just don't know the questions to ask, because you would just never in your right mind think someone would possibly do that. Why are they putting animal products in these vegetables? So you have to have a lot of compassion for yourself too, because you're not a magician or a mind reader. You don't know what everyone's putting in the food. You just have to take your best guess sometimes.
I feel like you have to have a lot of mindfulness and like to have these conversations as well. There's like there's a huge amount like that you have to ask. There's a huge amount you have to kind of like leap around, especially as a vegan, or at least if you know what you're asking for. But it's also having those conversations in a mindful way for them not to get kind of their back up. Like you want an open and honest communication with these chefs and restaurants, because there's a lot of time. I know specifically in Australia, that they weren't too forthcoming with exactly what was in some foods, which was quite upsetting. But it's just keeping a mindful stance on that and being like, I'm not going to get angry at this situation. I'm going to kind of visualize the conversation prior, just to make sure it's all going well in my head before I start having this conversation with another human.
Yeah, I think it's okay to get angry sometimes, but I think it's what do we do with that anger that really matters, because we do have to acknowledge our feelings. I mean, in those situations, I feel extremely frustrated. I've had conversations with servers where I'm like, is the garlic sauce vegan? And they're like, yeah, it's vegan. And I'm like, well, last time they told me it wasn't vegan. So what changed? Oh, well, sometimes it's vegan, sometimes it's not. It's so frustrating to be like, okay, I'm not going to get frustrated, right? But it's more like mindfulness is more like acknowledging I feel frustrated in this situation. Okay, what's going to happen next? And you can't control how someone's going to react to you. So it's not your fault if someone reacts to you in a defensive way. You might have a chef that I've had chefs come out and say, I hate vegans. I hate serving vegans. And that's more your problem than mine, really. It's not my fault that you hate vegans. Okay, you can have that hate inside of you, but just you're responsible for your own self, your own mind and your own emotions. And you have to kind of decide, how do I want this interaction to go? And what do I want to get out of it? Do I want to find common ground? Do I want to get my needs met? Do I want to set a boundary? Do I want to just protect my peace? It's up to you what kind of experience you want to have, and you can't control what the other person's going to do. And sometimes it can be really frustrating and anxiety provoking to go out to eat. And that's really what started my work in advocating for myself, because I was finding myself so annoyed and anxious and upset, feeling like I was going out to eat and not getting my needs met. And so I had to find a way to communicate my needs in a way that was accepted, in a way that people were willing to listen to them. And I found that it's a blend of compassion and also being really straightforward. So as vegans, I don't think that we need to be apologetic and go out and say, oh, I'm so sorry, it's so hard to serve me. We don't have to really say that, but we do need to be really clear about what it means to be vegan and what we are expecting as a customer and why we're expecting that. So we can use our order at the restaurant as a form of education so that they can continuously improve. And also to know that we want to speak to the people who have the power to make changes. So if we're venting to the server about our issues with the food, well, they didn't make the food and they didn't control what was on the menu. So for the server, that might be a really frustrating experience. But if you ask to speak with the chef or the manager, you might have a more productive conversation. But it does take stepping out of your comfort zone sometimes to ask to escalate that situation, to speak to someone who has the power to make that change.
Yeah, and I think going out of your way to actually try and speak to a chef as well, that does take courage. And also, chefs aren't also the nicest of people. They normally had about 4 hours sleep, haven't had their cigarette break at this point, and they're very angry people sometimes. Whereas some people are absolutely lovely. But going out of your comfort zone and speaking to a chef and not knowing what the reaction is going to be as well from them, it can be a daunting situation. But I think at the same time, if they are willing to put a vegan option on the menu or create one, they're able to serve more people. Without that option, they're serving what would be the majority, but there's always going to be a few people that they can't serve, so they're still losing money at some point.
Yeah. I mean, we have to get curious about why people do things before we jump to conclusions. So if you're speaking to chefs or restaurant owners or managers and they don't have anything vegan on their menu, you might start by just asking them why that is. Maybe they never even thought about it, or maybe they're not getting anybody coming in and requesting it, and so they just don't think it's even worth it. Or maybe they tried it once and nobody bought it. Or maybe they don't have the skills or expertise, or they think it's too expensive, or whatever it is. But it's hard when we come in with assumptions about how we're going to be treated as a vegan guest, or why maybe we assume they hate vegans because they don't have anything vegan on the menu, when in actuality it could be any number of reasons. So we want to start, if we're willing to even have the conversation, to start just by non-judgmentally simply asking them why it is that they don't have any vegan options, and go from there.
So if somebody was in your position, and has just moved to a country and there is not many vegan options, how would you direct them to kind of, navigate this? What's the kind of steps that you would go through to kind of, at least form a conversation to make sure you are getting your needs met? Because it's all great that we can say this, but was there a way that worked best for you?
I think it's funny that you say that, because so many people who join my consultant training program are foreigners who have immigrated to another country, just like me. And I think sometimes it takes that foreign perspective to go in and feel that you have to make a change. You have to do something, or it's just not going to be livable. So we have now in my current cohort, a Hungarian living in Spain, and I've trained a Romanian living in Tokyo, and Americans living in China. So it's just all over the place. We come in and we're like, hold on, something needs to change here. And I do think that the work also benefits the local people who I find actually maybe more cynical about their own community, because they maybe have been trying to change things for a while and they're not seeing the progress. And so they kind of look at the fire and are like, oh, good luck, good luck trying to change things. But I think if you move to another place, number one, you have to, of course, is there a language barrier? Because that in itself can be very tricky for people. I was lucky that I live in a community where people speak English. I'm also making my attempts to learn. So there's 4 languages in this country, so I'm making attempts to learn those languages as well. But in the beginning, I didn't speak those languages really, and luckily people were able to communicate with me. But if you're in a country where you don't speak the language, I don't think that the first step is to try to make any changes, because that can be very hard. Probably your first step is to learn to communicate with people and to learn how to set your own boundaries so that you can get served. So just prioritize yourself and getting a decent meal. And you can do that. There are lots of translation tools online, but I've also seen vegan cards where you can have a card and you kind of hand it to them, and then it says, here's what vegan means and here's what I'm able to eat. But if you want to have the best experience at a restaurant, you want to give them time to prepare for you. So if they don't have any vegan options in their menu, they probably don't have vegan food in their kitchen. So the way that restaurants are purchasing food, they're buying enough food for what's on their menu. So even if they have vegetables in their kitchen, if they're doing it right, they don't have an excess of vegetables. They don't have food waste. They're buying the vegetables they need for whatever side dishes are in the meat dishes. So it's not that they're just going to be able to go outside of their menu and create all sorts of things for you. So we can't just walk into a random restaurant and expect them to cook something from scratch if they don't actually have the ingredients they need in order to do that. So the best thing we can do in that case is to approach the restaurant in advance, whether that is calling, going there, sending them an Instagram message, sending them an email. Sometimes they won't respond, and then maybe that's not the best restaurant for you to go to. But the good restaurants that have the time to cater to niche customers will respond. And you can even ask for a call back from the chef if you're not sure if you're getting the most accurate information from the person who you're speaking to on the phone. And then be curious about what the chef is serving you, because you might get the answer of, oh yeah, we'll figure something out. We can always make something. We make special food for vegans. And then, it's always just going to be a pasta or a risotto. So you can ask, well, what is it? What do you normally cook for vegans? And let them tell you. And maybe they'll say it's a grilled vegetable platter or whatever it is. And if it doesn't sound good to you, then make a suggestion. Say, how would you feel about adding some chickpeas to that dish? Because I really like to feel satisfied. And when I have a higher protein source, it just makes me feel better when I go out to eat. And just tell them why you want that. And let them tell you why or why not that they can or cannot do that. So it takes having that conversation and being willing to be speaking up for yourself and getting your own needs met. If they say we're making tofu, you can say, how do you prepare the tofu? We want to make sure they actually understand how to cook tofu. Is it going to be grilled? Are they going to try to put silken tofu on the grill and have it melt away? Because I've seen that before. Are they going to know that they have to season it with something and it has to have a flavor? Maybe they may not. So in order to get a good meal at a place where they don't know how to cook for you, you need to coach them and communicate with them. And otherwise, don't go there if you're not willing to do that, or at least adjust your expectations, because you'll probably have the experience that they did their best, but their best might not be up to your standards. And don't end the conversation there. If you do go and they do make you something and you have a good experience, then speak to them about it and encourage them to put it on the menu. It's going to benefit them if they made something that was easy for them and it tasted good, for them to just put that on the menu, because next time you show up, or if someone else shows up, they'll be prepared to serve them and they won't have to go through all the trouble they did to make something special for you.
There was one time I was in Colombia and I asked them if they had a vegan option. I didn't ask all the questions that you mentioned, and they were like, yeah, we have a vegan option, it's just not on the menu. And they sat down and they brought me over like a bowl of bread, and I assumed that may have been like a starter. That was the whole entire meal. I waited there for an hour waiting for something to come out, and it was just this bowl of bread.
Wow.
Yeah, which was wild, and obviously very unsatisfied afterwards, because it was not even buttered or anything like that. but like having those kind of those conversations kind of obviously stop that kind of situation from happening as well. Because this was, to be fair, like I was in the middle of like a very desert area. There was like 2 restaurants in the whole entire place. I didn't actually expect them to say yes to a vegan option, but at least I had something. It was dry bread, but
I mean, at least they knew what vegan was, I guess. But you see that all everywhere. We have a consultant in France, and we always make fun because once she went out asking for a vegan option, and they brought out a bowl of melon, and that was it. And we just always go back to like, remember that time you got that bowl of melon? Because they don't know what's happening. You know, they're trying their best. They don't really understand what vegan is. They're very confused. Gluten-free, vegan, healthy. What is all this stuff people are asking for these days? So we have to be really clear. And it's not just in this situation, it's in life. I mean, probably if you're having trouble being clear about this, you're having trouble being clear in other areas of your life too. So it's just a great skill to develop in general. How can you set boundaries? How can you be clear about your needs and communicate that? And the more you practice it, the easier it's going to become in every area of your life.
Absolutely. I think as well, like what you've done with obviously helping so many different countries as well as Aruba is still doing a lot better than some of the places that you will go to in the States. So I think I saw it. I was watching your stories the other day at that conference that you went to that had lack of options for you at like a hospitality conference.
Yes. And it's so funny because when I was so I went to this major hospitality conference, and the only vegan option was a bowl of salsa for the chips. And I guess the chips might have been vegan too, but it wasn't labeled. So it was a salsa that had a big vegan label on it. And it was a entire buffet of non-vegan items. I mean, it was like a bat mitzvah for like a wedding. And it was, it was salsa for me, which I wasn't even going in expecting food, so it's fine. But it was a hospitality conference. And one of the organizers at a similar conference, it was 2 conferences in one. So I was speaking to the organizer of the smaller one, and she was saying, she comes from the UK, and she was saying, this was horrendous trying to organize catering for this conference. The US doesn't know what they're doing, like with vegan options. Like she could not imagine it. She said, I understand your frustration and why you started your company, because I could not get them to make a vegan option. They just couldn't figure it out. And there was actually a lot of talk at the global conference I was at about how the US is falling behind in a lot of areas of hospitality, not really understanding how can we push forward for more sustainable hospitality, and how can we mandate certain things. I think other countries are more quick to jump to mandates, but America is very much individual. We can do what we want. And other countries are like, wait, but we won't have a planet. There's this no planet, no profit kind of idea. Of course, not an idea, it's a reality. But the US hasn't really hopped on board with that. And part of the reason I started the consultant training program to train other consultants is because when I was posting a lot on Instagram on that Vegan Aruba account early on in my consulting journey, people would come to Aruba from places like New York, San Francisco, and then they would go home and say, hold on, I can't get the experience I had in Aruba in San Francisco. That's crazy. And I would hear this from them and be like, how is that possible? I had just come from New York where there were several vegan restaurants at the time, but the truth was you could only get the vegan food at the vegan restaurants. There weren't a lot of mainstream restaurants having vegan options, or at least beyond, having a veggie burger. And in some places, in many places, it's still that way, where you have to seek out a specific vegan restaurant to have vegan options. And in Aruba, for better or worse, there just weren't vegan restaurants. And so the only place to get vegan food was at these mainstream restaurants. And that's why the culture here has become, the good restaurants, they have a separate vegan menu. So you almost have this like little vegan restaurant in a lot of these mainstream restaurants. So you can have that special experience, but also dine with your family who you're on vacation with, who maybe doesn't want to only eat at vegan restaurants on their vacation. So that is the reality, is that, I feel like I've said this over and over, but there's still so much work to be done, even in large cities. I have people in my current cohort now, one person who's right outside of New York City, one person who is in San Francisco, people in major cities that feel like there's still work to be done there, and they still can't get quality vegan options at mainstream restaurants.
Yeah, but it's coming from a place like London, or especially just Europe in general, where the majority is so vegan friendly, and then traveling around the States, which I expected to be, apart from like your California, like Los Angeles areas more, and maybe like some places in New York, it was harder than I thought it was going to be. Like, especially in like, I didn't really expect much from Texas when I went there. However, they did have some real good like Tex-Mex like vegan food. However, like it was far and like few between. Like it wasn't as expansive as I thought it would be. And in comparison to like England, for instance, McDonald's, for instance, they did the McPlant in England completely vegan. However, the States didn't know how to do that. They did it, but with like real cheese, real mayonnaise, and everything else. I'm like, there's such an easy swap there that you could have created. However, it is falling behind, and it's wild to see that like something that's so close to each other, the same company, can't physically create the same thing depending where they are in the world.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it you can track back to financial investments and government subsidies and lobbying, and it's really unfortunate when you start to think about just the where it tracks back to. But who's investing in these companies? When we're trying to push for more sustainable or plant-based options, they're not investing in the plant-based cheese, but maybe they're investing in the Impossible Burger, and so that's why you've seen an Impossible Burger, but you're not seeing the cheese. So a lot of it is not even who's owning these companies, but who's investing in these companies, and where do they want the money to go? They have these competing interests. So even with hospitality groups and hotels, if I'm going to work with a hotel and I want them to push for a more sustainable menu, more plant-based menu, but their investment company is invested in animal agriculture, that's going to be really hard to do because they're competing with themselves. So why would they be motivated financially to do that? Even if I can say, well, we can bring in more customers because you can serve vegan guests. Well, is it going to affect our investments in animal agriculture though, if more people are going to be eating plant-based? So you have to kind of start grassroots, I think, as well on the small scale. When you get into the larger companies like McDonald's and the large hotel groups, it becomes a bit trickier because of these investments.
Yeah, but it's like it's just it's mental to see that like some countries can fall so far behind in comparison to like others, and I do see it being the States more than anywhere else, which is unfortunate for such a global power as they like to put it. Like there's very much they fall behind in a lot of like different areas, especially when it comes to like the vegan or plant-based movement. That's not even if we're looking towards not so much food, but also like just sustainability in general. It's very behind.
Yeah,
But
there are a lot of people working at the local government level to push for change, and I think they're seeing progress. So if you do live in the States and you are able to work with your local city councils, your local office of sustainability, those are places that are going to be on board with listening to you and making change. And maybe they don't understand yet the link between animal agriculture and the unsustainability of our planet, but that is a place where you can go in and educate them and help start initiatives with restaurants and getting more plant-based on the menu. There's a great organization called Planted Society. They're also in Texas, Brittany Mann, and she has these initiatives where she works with local governments to get things done. And so we need people going at this from all angles, whether that's from the government aspect or from the business aspect or nonprofit. But there's so much that can be done. There's so much to be done, but there is also so much that we can do. And we need all these vegans out there to be creative and think, how can I make a difference in the world? And how can I do that starting with my own community?
absolutely, and like from what you've done has made such a difference as well. And like I do have to like how is like obviously from what you were doing and working with these chefs, how did this then turn into a whole entire hospitality business? Because that's then a giant leap from what you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even do a lot of private consulting anymore for chefs because I'm kind of just very busy running the company. So it started from branching from consulting to training other vegans because, like I said, people started asking me, how can I do this in my community? Or people actually started asking, can you come to my community and do this here? And that just wasn't feasible for me. Number one, as a social worker, it didn't make sense for me to be some person who was going around fixing communities. I would rather train the people who live there to uplift their own communities. But also as a mom, it didn't make sense for me to be traveling around and leaving my kids. So I thought, well, let me figure out, how do I get this information to people? And I thought of a lot of different ways. I thought I could write a book, I could do a YouTube channel, I could find a way to communicate to people. And then I realized that it's going to be a lot harder than that I really need to coach people, mentor them, explain to them how to start businesses in this field, because it was just such a new thing. I mean, when I started doing this, there were very few people in the whole world that were doing this kind of thing. So and really nobody doing it in the way that I was doing it. So I started a training program. It's a 12-week course, and it is a live course. So I started with 8 people. I didn't even think anyone would want to sign up. I just posted on Instagram, hey, I'm thinking of training people to do this. And within 48 hours, I had 8. I said, I'm not going to take more than 8 people. We'll see how this goes. Within 48 hours, I had 8 people signed up to pay me to teach them how to help their communities. I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I created the program as I was teaching it. And it was a 12-week course where I started teaching people how to build a community, sort of like a community movement and business, and start working with restaurants and whoever they wanted to work with in their community, whether that's food service businesses, catering companies, giving presentations in their community. We had to see where's your community at this point? Do they even understand what vegan is? And then where do we want to go? So it's a large scope of how to get this whole thing started for yourself and your community. And it's going to look different depending on where you live. But I started with 8 people. And then I was like, all right, well, I had other people that wanted to join the first cohort that didn't get a chance because I had set it at 8. So let me try again. I'll try with 10 people. And again, I had people wanting to do it. And so I was like, all right, let's keep going. And then I started prioritizing more people in the program from different regions, because I wanted to make sure that we were expanding to different regions and also not creating competition for the people that are just getting started with their businesses. So I started saying, okay, well, we need people from these regions. And then now I'm on my 17th cohort. So I've been doing this now for 5 years. And it's been amazing, really amazing to see what people have done. It's also been really challenging at times to see people put a lot of effort in, and then some people just not being able to continue that effort. For example, we ran this program during the pandemic when the industry was closed down in many countries. So people would start a business and then had to go back to their full-time job. They wanted to leave because they just couldn't start a business in hospitality during the pandemic. Or, they're facing some other issues with, we have some communities where they found that a lot of the restaurants are really just run by chains or large restaurant groups. And that is very hard to make changes on a small scale level as one person to impact an entire group. So it works better if you're doing grassroots. It works better to go to independently owned restaurants where the decision maker is there and can hire you. So we faced so many challenges. I've learned so much, and it just continues. The work just continues. Like I said, I'm on my 17th cohort. I have 11 people from all over the world in this cohort. And it's very passionate people who are willing to put in the work, because it's a lot of work to go out and do this in your community and to make the shift sometimes in your career. A lot of people coming into this, they didn't start in hospitality. They had other career paths like I did, and realized out of necessity that if someone was going to change their community, it had to be them, because no one else was stepping up to the plate. And there's such a need there. So it is very brave people that are going in to do this work and are willing to put themselves out there and try something new, something uncertain. But the company itself, so Vegan Hospitality, we are doing a lot more now than just training consultants. So I just launched a certification program for hotels this past April, where we now are setting the standard for what the vegan guest experience should look like in hotels. And we are demanding that hotels meet that standard in order to get certified and recognized for being vegan friendly. So we have 10 hotels certified so far, and it's only going to start increasing exponentially as more hotels hear about it. We are requiring the hotels to have a vegan meal for every meal of the day for the length of their average guest stay. So if your average guest is staying for 7 days in a week, then you need to have 7 breakfasts, 7 lunches, and 7 dinner options that are vegan friendly. You have to also have desserts that are not just fruit, and you have to have plant-based milks wherever coffee and tea are served. And then through the program, they also have to commit to training their staff through us. So we provide a training course for all of their staff in the hotel, where the staff is trained to understand what is vegan, what is the vegan guest expectations, and looking across all departments, not just the food. And then they also are required to meet with a consultant to work toward strategic planning goals that are going to lead them toward more vegan friendly options and also better animal welfare practices and more sustainable practices. And we actually give them a discount on their annual renewal fee for the certification if they make progress in their animal welfare goals. So we are asking them to, number one, take an animal off their menu. So we always advocate for beef off the menu first thing, because that's just going to make a difference also in their sustainability goals. So we want to take an animal off the menu, essentially set an animal free, whether that's a pig or a chicken or a cow or an octopus. But start there, and also for any other aspects of animal welfare that they can make an impact on, whether that is making a cage-free commitment or a gestation crate-free commitment, we advocate for that. We also advocate for them to get rid of any animals in captivity on their property, like birds in cages, and to stop recommending for-profit zoos and support sanctuaries instead. So there are a lot of things that hotels and the hospitality industry in general can do to support animal welfare. Not all of it is changing the menu, but some of it is. And my company is at this point really working to change the industry to help them set the standard for what it means to be a truly vegan friendly property. We're also partnering with a lot of other organizations to go more in the sustainability direction, because that is a big conversation in hospitality right now. And globally, especially, like not just in the US, where I said they are struggling a bit, but in other countries, there are now sustainability mandates in the hospitality industry. So helping to educate the industry and understanding that food-related emissions can be a large chunk of your overall emissions, which is something you don't see them really focusing on. And if they are focusing on food-related greenhouse gas emissions, it's usually in the area of food waste management. So they're trying to minimize food waste, but they're not really thinking about or willing to necessarily maybe remove beef from their menu, which could cut their food-related emissions in half overnight if they just reprinted their menu. So, like I said, there's a lot of conflicting interest with investments, and there's a misinformation, lack of education, and we're trying to do it all as much as possible, and work also aligned with other organizations that are complementary to what we're doing and can help push the industry forward in the direction that it really needs to get into in order for us to have a sustainable planet.
That's incredible that it's gone from restaurants to like actually, these giant venues that are gonna also so many people go to like yearly. Like that it's gonna make an impact on so many different like parts of that industry. And that's just incredible that like what one person moved to Aruba once, and this is what's happened in this time. That's like insanity, like, but incredible.
Yeah, it's hard to believe one thing can lead to the next, but I think so many people have stories like this, that there's this like tipping point in your journey where you kind of have to decide, am I leaning into this? Am I going to go for it? Or am I just going to keep going on the track that I was going on before? And for me, it was just saying, yes, I'm going to do this. And I continuously have those turning points. I feel like almost every year there's some sort of pivot or reaction or, a need that I have to meet, and I have to decide, am I going to lean into this and take a risk or keep doing it the way I've always been doing it? And for me, the answer is usually, let's give it a shot, because maybe I can make a bigger impact that way.
Do you have like a lot of mindful practices that kind of come with this? Because you just jumping into things and saying yes sounds very much like myself as well, where I would just say yes to things and hope for the best half the time. But also I've then learned in the last, year or so to be very much a bit more mindful towards these things, or at least kind of like have a routine that allows me to kind of think sometimes before I do these, because normally I'm very much yes, and it doesn't always work out in my favor.
Yeah, well, in the beginning, I said yes to everything because I was just thrilled to have an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives and in the world. And when people were asking me for help, it just felt really good to say yes. And then I realized I was getting stretched really thin, and some of the things I was saying yes to weren't exactly aligned with what I wanted to be doing or with my skill set. And I started being a little more discerning about what I was saying yes to. So I, at this point, feel a little bit more aligned with just my gut or my inner knowing, and I'm able to more easily steer myself in a direction that feels right, and it allows me to move forward quickly. But mindful practices you asked about. So I have been studying mindfulness since 2011. So that's a very long time now. And I used to do more formal meditation. So I would sit and do mindfulness practices. Now I have 2 kids and limited time to work, and I don't really meditate that often anymore. But what I do is I bring myself back to the present moment. Whenever I feel myself straying away, I'm able to, because I've built that mindfulness muscle over the years, I'm able to notice when my thoughts are out of control, or when I'm maybe spiraling into negativity, and I'm able to bring myself back and just refocus on the present moment. And I do have a very optimistic inner voice. Whether that is something I worked on or it's just innate, it's probably both. But I really do have a really optimistic inner voice. And so I have a lot of belief in myself and in other people. And I feel like the only way for me to live in this world and show up is to think the best, think the best, expect the best, and work toward it. And I try not to let things get me down too much. Obviously there are things that feel really terrible. The recent U.S. election was very difficult to process. And I told you right before we got on this call that I was just watching Christspiracy, which is that new documentary that came out. Also so sad. So being mindful for me means also acknowledging my feelings, reminding me why I'm doing what I'm doing. It can get complicated. You get into all the hospitality talk and the sustainability talk, and then you get all into the mumbo jumbo, and you're like, wait a second, 5 million animals were killed in the time that I had my work day today, and remembering what that is, what the reality is, and why we're doing this, and it's really heavy. So there's a lot of self-care that also has to go into it, and community that has to go into making veganism your life purpose or your career, is finding community. And for me, I think what also helps me keep going is the fact that I have this privilege to be able to mentor other people on these journeys. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction to be able to see them succeed and see them make an impact on their communities and on their own lives as well, to let them take their passion for veganism and turn it into something that feels productive in their lives. And it makes me so happy because it allows me to create just a much bigger impact. Like you said, it's like there's a ripple effect that I happened to move somewhere, and all these factors led to me making an impact in my community. And that led to a lot of things happening in the world. And I feel very, very grateful that I've had the opportunity to do that in my lifetime so far.
That's beautiful. Really, that very much resonated as well. It was also like you having an optimistic one, like inner monologue as well. Like it's so different to what a lot of people have as well. Like there's, for me, it's hard to comprehend because I don't have an inner monologue. Like there's nothing, which is wild. But like from like a lot of people that I do meet, it's very kind of like intrusive thoughts. But the fact that yours is very optimistic is just incredible.
I worked on it. It's not something that came, I don't know. I don't think it necessarily was there all along. I also tended to have a very critical voice. And I think I also was able to shift that critical voice into more productive kind of criticism. So constructive criticism versus criticism that just keeps you down. And in order to use that criticism for good. So I'm pretty critical all the time, using my critical skill in the industry to push it forward. But having compassion for myself and other people is really essential. It's essential. You really can't make an impact if you are thinking the worst of everybody and thinking the worst of yourself. If you want to do better, you have to believe it's possible. And so what I teach in my programs, we start on the first week with envisioning what success is going to look like for you, envisioning what it would look like for your community to be vegan friendly. You have to see it in your imagination, and then you can make it a reality. So I do teach a lot of mindfulness in my courses. When I teach the consultants, I give them also a whole mindfulness program that they can take. And the people who do take it feel, sometimes I hear that their life has been changed from it. So that's also an amazing experience to see people go through this mindfulness transformation as well.
Yeah, I think like mindfulness, especially like visualizations and manifestations, is such a big thing that actually has got science behind it now. Like before, like a few years ago, that was very woo woo stuff. However, it's very much like it's very much part of my like my daily routine, and I felt the change even just with the mindfulness and the visualization, things like that, because like you can make things reality if you need to, or if you're willing to, put that time and effort in.
Yeah, I mean, we're all constantly shaping reality as we live in the reality. And I, I think people want to make an impact on the world. And what we have to remember is that you already are. Everyone's making an impact no matter what. You're making an impact from your action or your inaction. And every decision you make, it does impact other people. So whatever you're doing in your life, you're going to make an impact either way. And you can have more control over your impact if it's more intentional. If you decide what kind of impact do I want to make and what action steps do I want to take to move toward that. But we're all impacting, from our purchasing decisions to the way we raise our children to the way we speak to other people out in the world. We're all making that impact on our surroundings, no matter what, whether we want to or not.
No, I completely agree with that. I completely agree. So before we wrap this up, where can we find you? Like, if we want to find you, if we want to work with you, like, where do we find you?
You can go to my website, veganhospitality.com. I also am pretty active on LinkedIn. It's just Meredith Marin on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I always respond to messages, so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. You can also find me at Meredith Marin on Instagram. You can find me still at Vegan Aruba on Instagram or at vegan.hospitality on Instagram, or just Google my name. You'll find lots of ways to connect with me. I love to hear from people, and I actually have connected with a lot of people through people who've heard me on podcasts. So I've met a lot of great people in my life from doing podcasts, and that's why I continue to do them. And I will respond to you. So if you don't hear back from me, then probably it went to spam or something. So try to find me on a different channel. And I look forward to seeing who's listening and who reaches out.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you for this conversation. It was really interesting. I love the breadth of different topics we covered today.
Yeah, we went over it quite a lot.